This is Elevator People, conversations about taking ideas to the next level on behalf of visionary leaders. I'm your host, PJ Simmons, and I serve as VP of Marketing at Whiteboard, a creative agency serving visionaries seeking to make vision visible. What happens when a seasoned strategist, bookstore owner, and brand thinker begins to wonder if the way we approach marketing today, the language we use, the goals we chase, the culture we create, might be due for a rethink? You get Jason Locy. Jason has spent his career helping mission-driven organizations navigate the intersection of brand, culture, and identity. He's the author of Culture-Bending Narratives, a guide for leaders and marketers who want to look beyond the trends and rethink how meaningful brands are built, not just through storytelling, but through values, posture, and presence. In a moment where so many marketers are searching for a better way to do this work without losing their soul in the process, Jason offers a rare combination of wisdom, restraint, and clarity. Here's my conversation with Jason Locy. Jason, thank you so much for joining me today. Excited about this conversation because you and we obviously get to work pretty close together on a daily basis here at Whiteboard. Have known each other, and I've respected you as both a friend and a mentor of sorts over the last 10 to 15 years, which has been a lot of fun. But today I'm going to tee it up, and then I want you to unpack a few things. Your most recent book is a book called Culture-Bending Narratives. Get this in the frame so we can see it. Moving beyond story to create meaningful brands. And what I appreciated about this is you talk about dominant cultural norms and its implications on all things: mindsets, brand, marketing, culture, etc. Obviously, today we're going to be honing a little bit more niched into the brand and marketing deal. But a subset of those cultural narratives, they're all around us, and we have to wade through them and figure out, are we just going to roll with the punches and continue to operate in what culture says we should do? Or is there a different and better way? So in this, you actually have a framework called the 4 norms, where you break down desire, mindsets, language, and behaviors, and how we think differently about how we approach each one with marketing. So real quick, man, one, I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then diving into that specific framework, how did that come about for you?
Yeah. Well, thanks for chatting. I was excited to hang out. As you said, we've known each other a long time. So it's kind of cool we've known each other a long time, but never really formally worked together. So it's been cool to
Yeah.
work with you and then also to have these conversations. I feel like it didn't really need to, we've had this conversation in some form or shape for years. So it's kind of
Yeah.
neat to just formalize what we end up killing the first 30 minutes of a 1 hour phone call talking about anyway. So
It's every time that I hop on a call with you, we just banter, and it's literally like every other day, and we're talking
yeah,
about this stuff, and I'm like, "My gosh, why don't we just have a recorder in the background?" And so
yeah.
now we kinda do.
Yeah, I love it. Well, to answer your question, my background is in the agency space. I started an agency back in 2001, and our primary customer was nonprofits and social enterprises. And we worked with this sort of design thinking context and applied that to design strategy, brand strategy, marketing, digital strategy, little org stuff every now and then, branding and awareness campaigns. And because that was all for nonprofits and social enterprises, you find yourself really quickly making sure, or wanting to make sure, or trying to make sure that what we're actually doing in the strategy, what we're actually doing in the output of that strategy aligns with the core value set or mission of the organization. And that's often really hard, or a lot harder maybe than it seems or should be. And so to tie that to the framework really it had a purpose. It had the idea was, how do we help folks craft a narrative, and a narrative being the overarching idea or ethos that you want to express inside of your messaging or organization or whatever, and making a distinction between that and story. But the idea of the framework was to get people, it was an imagination exercise. So
Mhm.
get people to kind of understand that whatever you're talking about, there's a dominant way that your audience or culture or your peers think about things. And we need to either kind of step into that and embrace it because it's good and we agree with it, or it's bad and we agree with it, or it's good and we disagree with it, or it's bad and we disagree with it. It's not the point. The point is to kind of recognize it, identify it, think about it, and then decide, are we going to be a part of that? Or are we going to offer a counter to that, or something totally other and an alternative to it? So the framework was really an imagination tool, and then I think it can apply to, you know, anything where you're trying to push back on something or
Yeah.
be thoughtful about something.
Yeah, and this is, as mentioned, something that you and I talk about, what is really kind of carried out within the cadence of what feels like daily right now. And as it pertains to this audience and the posture of this audience, um, a lot of these individuals are marketers, growth strategists. They're looking to scale their organization, their business, but they're starting to ask the questions of, is this the right way to do it? And so one question that I want to dive into is, specifically in the world of marketing, there's definitely a disconnect often between growth strategy and an organization's deeper mission. You hinted on this just a little bit. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's always a tension, and the tension exists for any number of reasons. So I guess thing one is just sort of to recognize that there's a tension. Why it exists, you know, it's often because of pressure from somewhere. So, even the idea of growth, which is good, healthy things grow. That's awesome. Or it can be good. That where's that coming from? So is that because an investor gave money and you're trying to get that person the return that they are expecting? Is that because you're trying to sell more of a thing in order to make payroll? Is that because you have a mission or a thing that you're trying to do out in the world that's positive and you need more people to help you? So more volunteers or whatever. So the pressure can be neutral. Um, it can be good or bad. That really is not the point. The point is, like, that pressure is being applied to your thinking, and then there's an expression of that, or there's a response to that pressure that can be fear-based. And so now, because I'm in this situation, I have this pressure on me, even though it might be healthy pressure or good pressure or whatever, I want to succeed. And one response to that is fear. And if fear is the response, then you do kind of have a limiting your imagination is limited, or it can be limited, and so you end up doing just like what works or what everyone else is doing or whatever.
Yeah.
And those things, um I don't want to say that they're universally bad. Like, that's not what I mean, and that we're still a little abstract here, but the point is to recognize what's happening. And I think recognizing what's happening is probably the very first kind of idea here, or step here, if you will.
Yeah. During our call, when we were preparing for this a little bit, the way in which you described it to me, and I love the terminology that you used. You used this terminology called thoughtful compromise. For you, what does that mean in the context of branding, marketing, and leadership? How do we balance this kind of tension that you're talking about of principles and pragmatism?
The idea of thoughtful compromise is an old idea. It was introduced to me by my friend Steve Garber. Um, and it basically says that there's nothing we're going to do that's going to be totally perfect
Mm,
or ideal. And so even though we might recognize the thing we're doing isn't exactly the way we want it to be in marketing, or the tactic we're using is it's a little off,
yeah, yeah,
just recognizing that, and then saying, okay, am I willing to compromise this in order to keep my mission going? Um, and in the book, the example I use is a hamburger joint called Elevation Burger, and it was started in order to be able to offer affordable hamburgers that were ethically sourced and grown without hormones, etc. And they kind of extended that idea into the entire design of the business with like bamboo flooring when you come in. So that's completely a regenerative resource. I already talked about the meat, etc. But you can still buy Coca-Cola. You can still buy
yeah.
soft drinks or whatever the brand is. You can still buy soft drinks. And the reason is because the margin on that is very high. So by offering a soft drink, which kind of is counter to the mission of the burger place, they can make money, which subsidizes and lowers the cost of the beef or the hamburger, which makes it more affordable and therefore accessible to more people. So a little bit of compromise on what drinks you serve allows the actual vision to be extended in some particular, in this
Yeah.
case, in a very particular way around affordability. So recognizing that having a soda might not be on point with your mission doesn't mean you have to do it or not do it, but it does mean you have to be thoughtful. And are you willing to compromise on the soda in order to make the beef cheaper? Or would it be better to not have soda and make the beef more expensive, and maybe have people who maybe have a whole subgroup or demographic of people who can't afford the beef miss out on the opportunity to experience it?
That's great. I love that concept. I find that, good lord, on a daily within the work that I'm doing. Even as you're explaining that now, I'm thinking about a particular client that I'm working with that we're trying to figure out those trade-offs. What are we willing to compromise on that exploitative, ethical, redemptive spectrum to make sure that we balance well the results that we're trying to get, but also do so in a meaningful and thoughtful way where we're not taking advantage and or doing things in an incorrect manner. So that's wonderful. All right, what I love to do is I'd actually like to dive into this framework a little bit deeper. I think this is going to be super helpful for folks. The four norms, breaking it down for each norm. I love to explore the tension in marketing, real world applications, and shifting towards more of redemptive practices. So, as a quick reminder, four norms are desires, what we long for, mindsets, which are how we think, behaviors are how we act, and then language, what we say. For the desires, one of the biggest tension in marketing is profit versus purpose. How do you see this play out in real world business decisions?
Um, I mean, I think the biggest, I mean, this is a very real tension, obviously. I come from a school of thought that says they can both exist. And that business is actually a way that people can use to bring about healing to the world. That's why I work a lot with nonprofits and social enterprises, because in some way they both want to kind of make the world a better place. They're just choosing two different containers to do that. The I think the point here is, or that you're pressing on, is this idea that, it's not just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it.
Mhm.
And just because something makes business sense doesn't mean you should do it. And so maybe inside when profit and purpose kind of intersect, you do have to reframe the question a little bit, or you do have to kind of come at it from a different angle. And you do have to sort of be willing to maybe not sacrifice necessarily on profit, but you are often kind of giving something up in order to make that happen. And I think that's a positive thing. Um, and I think, we've used the word growth here a couple of times. Probably the
Mhm.
very first kind of, now we're down into the language part of the four norms, but but maybe the very first thing is to kind of ask, instead of growth, what does it look like to grow this thing? What would it look like to steward this thing?
Mm.
And maybe just the idea of stewardship over growth would be a really great place to kind of start. And most of the time, inside of a business context or inside of a marketing context, the desire is to grow or to be bigger or whatever, or to make money. But what if the desire were shifted a little bit to say, like, hey, it's not about those things, but in a more complete way, I have a gift that either I was given or I started or whatever, and now it's mine to sort of steward and to hold in a particular way. And that may look like growth. That may look like a really healthy form of, on a profit standpoint, a really healthy form of kind of stasis. Um, and that's okay. That's okay too. No one celebrates that stuff, so it's hard. um,
Yeah.
but I think we should.
Do you think that that's possible with, let's say, in-house and or agency marketers, employees who are working on behalf of a larger organization that, you know, they're at least their communicated value structures isn't exploitative or growth at all cost in nature, but the internal culture and experience of how they run their P&Ls, what they reward, what they punish, all of that could how how does an internal individual operate with that mindset in a healthy manner? Can that be done?
I don't think you should go to your boss at your big company tomorrow and say, "Hey, I've been rethinking our marketing strategy, and I would love us to make less money next year, and I'm not going to hit any of my goals because I would like them to be lower." Probably not the best move. And I totally get the pragmatic nature of all this, and I can
Yeah.
say that on the agency side, you know, I mean, can you imagine going to a meeting saying, "Hey, totally heard you. We would love to do something that probably isn't going to work but feels better." That's really tough. And so
Yeah.
I use the word "can you imagine" intentionally because I do think there's two things that come into play here. One is imagination, and so um, we we do probably have to open up our imaginative aperture to kind of think about this in new and different ways, and we can talk about that. And then the second is there's a improvisational tool here that's helpful, where we have to be able to navigate things with that imaginative context, not knowing exactly how to do it. There is no playbook that I know of that that you can that will allow you to navigate that conversation with someone in a good way. I have some thoughts on perhaps how we might do that, and we can talk about those. But yeah, you're gonna have to really kind of have an imaginative and improvisational sort of tool set at your disposal to kind of work through this.
Yeah, I think imagination is huge. I've been noticing this within my own work that when I'm approached with various potential compromises and I make the decision, hey, that compromise is a little bit too far out for me to say, yeah, I'll take that compromise. And what it does is it actually forces additional imagination and creativity for me to find a different way. And that's been incredibly liberating, both within just, the weird ickiness, like, feeling of, "Should I be doing this or should I not?" But also a sense of, maybe healthy pride into, oh, this is actually making me a better marketer or a better strategist or a better steward of my skill set to grow in this particular vein of whatever it is that I'm doing. And so that's been pretty awesome personally.
Yeah, I think to that point, anytime someone says you have to do it this way, that should be just a little thing to kind of alert us that perhaps we're going to have to improvise our way through this, and perhaps we're going to have to use our imagination to navigate it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's right or wrong or whatever. But it does mean that you should definitely like challenge that assumption in your head.
Yeah. And what that then does is I mean, that kind of translates even into the mindset element of this, how we think. Um, Not to sound too redundant, but I think it's worth asking. Many businesses operate with a zero sum mindset where growth comes at someone else's expense, right? So what do you think in your experience? And I know we have challenges with this even today with organizations that we're called to steward and to serve. That zero sum mindset, why do you think so many organizations and businesses and marketers fall into that? What do you think fuels that mindset in marketing and business strategy?
I mean, it's the entire sort of cultural narrative around business. I win, you lose. And if that's your mindset coming into it, then there's really no alternative. Like I have to win. And if I win, you lose. Therefore, it is a zero sum. Um, the counter to that, I think, is a different a different construct, which would be summed up scarcity versus abundance. So scarcity mindset says there's only so much, I have to get it, and the more I get, the the better I am, and I now I have it and you don't have it. No, back to zero sum. Abundance says there's plenty, and I can have this and you can have some, and that's okay. And in that mindset, you're way more free, I think, to navigate that conversation around zero sum because it's no longer zero sum, it's plenty. There's enough for all of us. There's an abundance of goods and riches and resources and everything that we might need. Now, the trick is this: in order to, and I would say that's just true. Period. In a business context, it is also true. And I do think that would radically change how you act as a business if you approached things that way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and we would have to celebrate different things too.
Yeah, for sure. It reminds me of an illustration, and because I know you, well, I'm going to say this with a lot of assumptions. You may not appreciate who this actually comes from, but I think the illustration falls true. Gary Vaynerchuk actually talks through an illustration where he talks about this tension of growth, competition, etc., is where most people pursue business growth and wins through the context of land grabs. Hey, there's only a certain amount of land that's available. I get this territory. If I get more territory, that means you have less territory. The way that he pictures it is you should actually view it more as skyscrapers. The sky is infinite. There's enough room for us all to build our towers as high as it possibly can. And I've always found that to be helpful as it pertains to, that particular mind shift for me individually.
Yeah, I think. By the way, I'm also a bookseller. So if you haven't read Metaphors We Live By, you should read it. And I think what he's doing there is saying that the metaphor of land where I grab it, it's risk. If you remember that game when you're a kid or whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
I have it, you don't, we're back to zero sum now. That metaphor does extend into like how we think about how we operate our business. And the skyscraper is certainly a better metaphor than land grab. I tend, by the way, to come back to sort of gardening metaphors. We're now back to stewardship and cultivating, and things like that. And so I don't want to push on a skyscraper metaphor because I think it's a step in the good direction. But I wonder if a different way of approaching it might not be land grab or skyscraper, but cultivating something that's in front of me and treating it in such a way that it would grow in a natural and healthy way.
Yeah, which then has implications on our behaviors, which is the third element of your framework. And I'm going to actually skip ahead in our notes here because I think I'm going to touch on something that maybe allows us to unpack this in a little bit more detail. On the behavior side of things, if we were to rewrite the marketing, let's just call it the rule of life for mission driven brands, what would it look like? And to kind of tee that up for those in the audience, if you're not familiar with the concept of a rule of life, this actually has its historical roots in monk culture, where it is a concept of a way of being, an ethos that is more or less a framework for decision making. And what I'm asking Jason you right now is, I mean, you know the landscape. It's heavily over indexed on silver bullet inputs and outputs. Everyone has a made simple framework that you purchase for 99 $200, and then outside of that you're going to explode your business by whatever 10x. This is all common language in this space. And so if we were to rewrite for marketers and growth strategists just a general rule of life who really seek to embody this ethos of just mission driven, redemptive way of marketing, what do you think that would look like?
I mean, it's almost impossible for me to think of a bigger question for you to have asked. um, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, this is a thing to figure out and kind of constantly be discussing. Um, I think the opportunity, though, is this. Mar- Forget the growth marketing stuff and the $99. I mean, that's garbage. That's just a literal falsehood. And I think if that's the space you're operating in, you should question that and examine it in a healthy way. And if you're someone looking to buy those services, I would just suggest that perhaps that's not a great path forward, uh, you know, for you. And I'd love to talk to you about why. So I'm going to skip over that. We can come back to it if you want, but I'm going to skip over it. I think, man, probably the biggest thing that marketing or advertising does is it reflects back to culture, or it encapsulates culture. It encapsulates what culture is already thinking the good life is.
Hmm.
And it is advertising is in some ways a reflection of the values of the people it's talking to. And so it has an opportunity. It can either just go with it and reflect back whatever's happening, or it can be a sort of beacon to a value set, a virtuous value set even, that is that leads people not towards more consumption, but towards a sort of flourishing and thriving in their life. Yeah. So I think maybe point one in the rule of life is, one of the things inside the rule of life is this idea that we can either reflect back to culture a value, or we can set a value and pull people towards it. Now, there's a ton of things inside of what I said that definitely need to be pushed on and like discussed, but in a broad general sense, that would be a thing. think that should be in the rule of life.
So, do anything or does anything come to mind for you when maybe just because you're in this space day in and day out that appear to be dominant expressions and you would identify as actually alternative expressions? So, if we're looking for examples, what are some things that you've noticed over the years?
In the marketing space specifically,
Yeah.
I'm always intrigued by. Oh, yeah, I should just say, obviously, every sort of example has a counterexample that makes it not a great example. Just like a framework, it breaks down at some point. But
Yep.
I'm always sort of intrigued by Patagonia,
Mhm.
and they're sort of like, "Hey, don't buy something new. Let us fix it for you." Approach, and that's a value, obviously, in and of itself that pushes back on consumption. That's sort of interesting to me. Um, the REI did something similar and maybe still does for Black Friday. They just like close their stores and tell their employees to
Mhm.
go like be outside. And those are two really great examples of an organizational mission flowing all the way through to the behaviors of the marketing. So those two are always top of mind for me. Muji's another one. If you don't know the Japanese brand Muji, um, Kenya Har is the creative director, and I think they do a really good job of kind of like designing the product to express the values of the organization, and even the way they market it is sort of calling you to something slightly different than maybe like an IKEA as a counterpart. So that stuff's always kind of interesting to me.
So, organizationally, you have some great examples. Are there tactical what's the best way to say this? Skill sets, executions, the way in which marketers are doing things that seem to you like, "Hey, I'm noticing that this is a norm, but here's maybe a redemptive alternative." Are there any actual, like, practicalities that you think is a better way?
I think this gets at your question, if not sort of interrupt me, but
Yeah.
or do interrupt me. I kind of think in the attention space, Matthew Crawford has a book out about this. And while I haven't read Chris Hayes's new book, it kind of gets at this too, I think, a little bit. But there's just no time to think. There's literally no time to just kind of process as a human
Yeah.
and be self-reflective because you're just inundated with something trying to grab your attention. And I would love it if people just kind of left me alone. Like, you know what? I didn't check out. I'm sorry. You don't need to email me.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to read an article. Why do you have to put your ad there? Please, just give me space. And I think the sort of redemptive act here is to recognize where people are and what they're trying to do inside of that space and just choose not to be there, maybe. And then think of really intentional ways. We work with a nonprofit that deals in newborn health. And there's tons of ways
Uh-huh.
you can market that, obviously. And there's tons of ways you can message it too. That would be not great. Um, but they've chosen to partner with people who are helping expectant moms through their pregnancy journey and just show up when it makes sense.
Yeah.
That's great. Do that. So whatever the counterpoint to that, or whatever the analog to that is in your industry, just meet people where they are and when they want to talk to you. Do not have to like be in front of people all of the time.
Yeah. I love that. What comes to mind for me is, I guess I would define it as invitational based marketing versus conversion based marketing. Like, obviously, conversion is important, but when you are trying to optimize every other sentence that is on a blog or in an ad or on a video to drive for a conversion, it's too much.
Yeah.
And you may, and I know you speak a little bit about this in some of your talks and some of your books, is like, yes, it may win the day, it may win the quarter, but for long-term brain sustainability and growth, like that's not what allows us to think long term and to provide value for a long term because it'll wear people out.
Yeah, and you're not. I mean, obviously, you're not honoring that person. You're not being respectful of that person. You're not valuing their time. You're not doing anything. It's completely. It's just a. It's a. It's not very I thou, to quote Martin Buber. You're just completely extracting everything you can out of me as a human so
Yeah,
that you can get what you want.
yeah,
And what that ends up looking like behaviorally or tactically, maybe I don't totally know for each person or each company, but just recognizing what's happening, I think is the first start on that. There's a there's a great Wendell Berry quote. If you He says, if you want to start something for 10 years, you ask one set of questions. If you want to start something for 100 years, you ask a different set of questions. And a lot of the stuff that you're kind of picking on here are, they're like they're 10-year questions to me. They're just things you ask
yeah,
if you're just trying to make it to the 10-year mark and be done. They're definitely not 100-year questions.
yeah. Which you would actually be proud of this. I actually received Jaber Crow Wendellberry's book in the mail yesterday. So
That's awesome.
excited
I think you'll love it.
excited
I
about
hope you love it. That's great.
yeah, I'm
Let me know
sure
how
I'm sure I
let me
will. So
let me know what
you
you think.
I will. We've
By
been
the way,
talking a lot about
by
go
the way,
ahead.
can I okay,
Yeah,
so Jaber Crow is a character inside of a fictional world that Barry's created, in that world that exists, it's a community called Port William, and it exists over multiple books with different characters that interact with each other. And he calls the community itself the membership. And and everyone's in, whether you know it or not, and you choose to be in. And you can choose to be in it, but everyone can be in it. And I think that's such a beautiful idea of that, as a consumer and as a marketer, we are in a membership through our humanity. And you can choose to treat me as a member or not, and that's kind of up to you. And I know it's getting a little abstract, but I think there's a mutuality to the relationship
yeah,
that doesn't exist inside this conversation, that you'll see in Barry and in Jaber Crow, where everyone is there to kind of support and lift up everyone else. And I do not feel that level of mutuality inside of this conversation normally.
yeah, agreed. Well, had no clue that it would help me become a better marketer. So thank you for that heads up. Yeah,
Well,
that's awesome. And
we'll have
you're
to define better.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's what we're attempting to do here in this conversation. S So that's important. Where my mind goes now is we've talked a lot about volume. We've talked a lot about mindset, about thinking in 10-year bets, 10-year set of questions versus 100-year bets, 100-year set of questions. One of the kind of I would say probably the foundational building block of this skill set of marketing is communication, messaging, and the language that we use. So that brings us to the fourth and final installment of this framework. Language, what it is that we say. We know that words shape reality, and so I'd love for you to unpack how does language that we use in marketing reinforce either harmful or beneficial narratives?
Yeah, I mean, language is super important, obviously. It has a lot of power. And that language, I think, is a direct reflection of your desires and mindsets. And so, how you say something, or how you choose to say it, how you choose to base something based on opportunity, perhaps. Or I was just in a meeting right before this, and there's like a value negative or value neutral, value positive way of expressing an idea. And we were talking about what word best got at each of those things. And now Do we want to express it in a value positive way? And if so, then we need to talk and use this set of language and words in order to get at that. And that value positive is a way better way to frame this than in the value negative, because everyone else is talking about it in the value negative. I get that's abstract, but you're deciding in your language around whether you're going to reinforce the dominant desires, mindsets, and behaviors, or if you're going to offer new language to people that they can use and they can buy into or even see, that is the very literal, tangible reflection of all of the thinking that can be for it through desires, mindset, behavior kind of conversation that we had.
That's good. No,
Too abstract?
no, not too abstract. Jason's looking at me through the camera right now, and I told him before we jumped on, I've been battling a cold, and so I'm starting to feel it, and he's like, what are you looking at?" That's he's
Well,
seeing the blank
some of the stuff,
stare.
yeah, but some of the, I acknowledge some of this stuff is hard to wrestle with without like actual, it's just hard to, it's hard to wrestle with.
Yeah.
Um,
The yeah, these are mental models, philosophical, and I mean, a lot more implications throughout on how we think and believe. Like, these are things to be and that's one of the biggest things that I appreciate about you. Like, every call that you and I have when we just hop on the phone and banter about these things, what I appreciate so much about you is you're very humble and honest into qualifying your response most times with, "Hey, I don't know the answer. I'm just trying to figure this out. This is a way to think about it." And personally, I find that so refreshing because what it's teaching me is it's teaching me how to think better, which in fact has implications on effective problem solving. Most people, and I would say the vast majority of them, bring it into the audience that we're speaking in today, we've kind of defaulted into this, let our minds check out, let's just execute the playbook, give me the answer. Now we freaking got chat gpt at our fingertips as well, and so it's always quick responses, quick answers. Here's the play, just execute. And that's the whole point of this podcast, is help us to think better and think differently about how this should be done. Is there a better way? Because I think we're all feeling it. I think there's a, we would call it a generation, but just marketers, strategists that are just, they're just exhausted with the rat race. And they want to figure out, is there, how do we, in a sense, gain the world in some sense without losing our soul? Is there a way to do that? Or if we can't gain the whole world, how do we still drive results, flourish, but also do so in a meaningful and redemptive manner? And I think if we can make that argument and help people see what could be, and that that actually is possible, we'll start seeing a movement of folks approaching their work through this lens, which makes me very excited.
yeah, look, I think that these things are possible. I I joke like we have to redefine better for you, better marketer. But I do think there's like a redefinition here along the way, and of some of this stuff and what you measure. Ultimately, at work, obviously, what you measure is what you kind of norm around and
Yeah.
try to actualize. So maybe thinking through what are different measurement techniques or devices that we use. Maybe thinking more, maybe thinking about things over time instead of like short burst or windows or sales cycles. And I get that you have to uh, be beholden to those things. If you're in a business, you're bound by the rules that govern the institution that you're in. So in some way you have to like kind of go with that, but it doesn't mean you can't try to subvert it. It doesn't mean you can't be thoughtful within it. It doesn't mean you can't understand what you're doing and go back to thoughtful compromise, etc. And it doesn't mean that you can't have some form of success inside of that.
Yeah.
But perhaps the way you think about those things could change a little bit. And in changing makes the conversation that we're having a little bit easier because we redefined what some of this stuff means. And now we're working towards that.
Amen. Amen to that. Well, let's we're coming up on time, so I want to work to ask a few more questions to close out our time together. And what I want to begin making the transition to is just maybe some practical suggestions that you could give us in this is large. Many would argue that this takes a lifetime to explore and to figure out and to get more and more comfortable with. But where are some good areas to start? And so if we desire to move from these so-called dominant norms that you've highlighted throughout our conversation more towards alternative or redemptive norms of marketing, for organizations or marketers who are wanting to begin making that shift, what do you think or suggest should be the first step? How would we begin uh, attempting to shift this within ourselves?
I mean, I would start with the framework. So pick your industry that you're in and start charting out what are the dominant desires, mindsets, behaviors, and language that we use in this industry. And then ask yourself, do I, as a human, think those are the right things? And if they are, great. And if not, and you can define right however you need to. And then if they're not, maybe ask yourself, is there an alternative way to think about this that might lead towards a more full expression of a value set, a virtuous value set that, I kind of adhere to or want to promote inside of my business. And I don't think you need to quote unquote nail it in the exercise, but just start. And if you do work at an agency, sorry, if you do work at a company, kind of start thinking through it. And then, if you feel safe in your environment, talk to your boss or the founder or whatever and say, hey, I've been really wrestling with this. I want to start doing marketing in a different way. And in order to do that, I need to start thinking through what that might look like. And I've started working on this. Can we talk about it together? And I don't know, maybe they'll be like, don't worry about it. Just keep hitting the numbers. Or maybe it'll prompt their imagination too. And you can have a really healthy conversation. I think what you can do is go in and say, hey, I'm doing things different now. We might lose out on some conversions or whatever. But probably not the best move, unless your boss is super cool. I think the other thing is figure out figuring out, are there alternative ways to market that get you the same result?
Yeah. Yep.
Um, and hey, I'm gonna turn off. I'll pick on something easy. I'm gonna turn off retargeting. I think it destroys people's ability to pay attention and to focus. I'm just not going to be a part of it. Great. Well, what are you going to do then? And what do you feel like you need to do? Um, and then also challenging the very idea of marketing, period. So do we need to market in a different way? Or can we, we're doing this now, PJ. Like maybe having an event for people is a better use of our marketing effort and resources. Bring people together, create a community around a central idea, and be cool with the results.
Yep.
Um, that's maybe a small business thing versus a big business thing, but maybe challenge even the very things that you're doing and introduce new things and see if you can prove out the success of those over time.
That's good. That's good. Well, couple rapid fire as we land the plane. You guys heard Jason say it a little bit earlier, but he and his wife actually own a bookstore in upstate New York. In the realm of this conversation, Jason, what would you recommend as just wonderful readings as people are dipping their toes into thinking differently about marketing, business, the purpose of business, etc.?
Um, yeah, I feel like that question kind of caught me off guard a little bit. That's great. It's top of mind because I was just talking to someone about it yesterday. But the Unreasonable Hospitality book, I think a lot of
Yeah,
people have probably already read it. But what he kind of gets at in that book is the tension between the front of the house and the back of the house. Um, and we've talked about that in different ways here. Like, well, my boss, the back of the house, isn't going to like what the front of the house is doing because it's going to make
yeah,
you know things more difficult. And I think he does a good job in that book of talking about how they serve each other. Um, and so that's kind of an interesting top of mind book for me right now inside of this conversation. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one that keeps popping up.
unreasonable hospitality. Very cool. Well, I know we've unpacked quite a bit of stuff in here. We've talked about the four norms. We've talked anywhere between volume, noise, meaningful, and redemptive marketing. If you can encourage listeners with one key takeaway, knowing that you're speaking to a group of marketers and growth strategists, what would you leave us encouraged by today?
Just because someone says you have to do something doesn't mean you have to do it. Just enter into that with a layer of thoughtfulness that says, is this a thing that I actually really literally have to do? Or is it a thing that I can kind of pick at and deconstruct a little bit and see what happens?
Awesome. Thank you for listening to Elevator People. It would be an honor if you subscribed on your favorite podcast platform and check out our agency website at whiteboard.is to help you and your team make your vision visible.